Good evening, everybody, and I hope you guys are ready for another session of Talking TSR. It's Sunday night. It's a little bit earlier than we normally are here. So this is going to be our new time slot here because of real life reasons. So yeah, check us out now on 8 p.m. On Sunday nights, every third Sunday night that is. And over to my virtual right or left, whichever Zoom has us today, is Rick. How you doing, Sir Rick?
I'm doing good. I'm happy to say. This week, I had the experience of going into the Lost City as a player for the first time, which,
Oh.
as you know, but the people watching probably don't. Obviously, I know a lot of these old modules very well, but the Lost City is one module that I've purposely stayed away from reading. I've stayed away from referring back to it, aside from seeing it, looking through it years ago. And I purposely kind of kept it away, as something
Nice.
that I could have a pristine experience with this well-known module as a player and not know the rooms and not have any spoilers and go into it fresh.
Nice.
And yeah, this week I kind of started that journey, so uh, it's very cool. The wait was worth it. So yeah, I'm getting
Cool.
to see that with fresh eyes. So that's been a fun experience. So
Nice. Are you're playing at 5e, I assume?
yeah, doing the
Cool.
5e thing.
Awesome.
But yeah, otherwise, kind of, sticking very close to the original. And yeah, again, I'm being a player, and I'm not even used to being a player. So
There you go.
I DM 99.9% of the time, because that's usually my stick. But
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah,
Oh,
it
great.
was fun. That was the highlight of my week. So yeah. So how's it going
Cool.
with you?
It's going well. It's going very, very well. So our on that note, actually, if I do after this top secret playtest wraps up, which we finished level 2 of the 3 levels this past week, when that finishes up, we've been talking about possibly continuing playing, and I think what we're going to end up doing is going to be Lost City, believe it or not, because folks don't
Nice.
know that and it's all ready to go and all converted to 5e. So that'd be
Hmm.
kind of interesting. We might both have a Lost City
Yeah.
game going on at the same time. But no, things are going well. Another week has gone by. I cannot believe it, but our open call comes to a close in less than 4 hours.
I feel
So
like
if
we
you're
just
out there,
announced it.
we did. So people are out there watching our show and not working on their submission. Get your priorities straight, and you have a couple more hours to go. And the last I checked my inbox was filling up with, and that's just from the last couple of days. I don't even think I have anything from today. So I'm gonna cautiously be optimistic and say we're gonna have 100 submissions. We are
Nice.
trending in that direction. I believe we're already over 80.
Mhm.
And I think we're a couple days behind on getting them from the queue. So yeah, so I think it's very exciting. A lot of excellent material. So really looking forward to it. So the next couple of days, I will be diving in and busting out a scoring rubric and scoring these along. So yeah, and then the rest of my life has been monsters, 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 which is what we're going to talk about tonight.
Yeah, that's right.
So
Back to the
yeah.
monsters.
Yeah, back to monsters. We are going to talk about the Fiend Folio tonight.
Mhm.
So, which is exciting because it's an interesting book. It's
Yes.
got a little bit of interesting backstory to it for those
Mhm.
folks who don't know. So this book was created largely by the UK design team
Mhm.
back in the late 70s, early 80s. It was originally to be published late 79. Actually, it was delayed because of some legal issues.
Mhm.
And that the rumor has it that that's what caused some of the reasons why it wasn't as critically as acclaimed as perhaps the Monster Manual or even the Monster Manual 2. But yeah, it was just it's fascinating. I mean, it's largely monsters designed by gamers
Mhm.
in the UK that submitted them to the White Dwarf magazine. Is White Dwarf still a magazine? Is it still going, or is it? It's one of those ones I probably
Yeah.
should have Googled that.
Um, I don't know myself. Um,
So yeah, there was a feature article, I guess monthly feature article called Fiend Factory, and most of the monsters that were published in the book were pulled from those pages. Plus, there was a couple from some TSR modules, some of the classics and everything, and so that you end up with a pretty eclectic selection of
Mhm.
monsters. But certainly some classics in
Yeah,
there, and some that
absolutely.
you probably wouldn't have thought would be classic,
Mhm.
but that ended up being classics. Some that were classics that were just kind of put in the book, like the Drow. But just it's interesting. Lot of swings and misses, I think, in there, but a lot of
Mhm.
really compelling monsters as well in there.
Oh
So give me
yeah.
your thoughts on
Yeah.
the Fiend
No, I
Folio.
agree. It's got that anthology feel. And I'm glad you mentioned the delay too, because that's before I share my other thoughts, like, that's something that always intrigued me because I tend to notice that stuff. And the fact
Hmm.
that the intro was, what was it, 1979, and it was
Yep.
published in 81.
Yeah.
I and I don't even know if the story ever came out exactly what I think it was art related, but I don't know.
No, it was legal. It was legal
Oh
issues
yeah.
because yeah, apparently they were trying to again, I don't understand it. They didn't go into detail, but they were
Yeah.
it was basically it came out to they ended up with basically being the UK division of TSR. I guess they were
Oh,
trying to
okay.
purchase or whatever, and it was in limbo for 2 years.
Yeah. That's
And that
really
was what
interesting.
caused the delay. Yeah.
Yeah, because I know it was on hold, and I know there's like, obviously the book, and I'm sure we'll get into the art. The book has got a smattering of different art styles,
Yeah.
and some of the artists in there aren't credited in the beginning. Like
Hmm.
there's a kind of very Conan the Barbarian style
Yes.
picture of a fight with
Yeah.
lizard men,
Yep.
and that looks like Tony Ackland's art, and he's not credited on the inside interior page or wherever the other artists are credited. And there's a few other art pieces that are, to my eye, are a little dubious.
Yeah.
So yeah, I figured
Definitely.
there was an interesting background there too with the art.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's got the feel of watching one of those horror anthologies, in that there's a very uneven feel. You can
Yeah.
absolutely feel that this was not the work of one author.
Hmm.
You can sense some entries are so detailed. A lot of the ones that came from modules, it seems, are hyper detailed, or the ones at least that came from Gygax's work. And then you've got
Yeah.
ones that are, I think, brutally short.
Hmm.
And that even affected my opinions of the book, as to
Yeah. Yeah,
how
it's
short.
it's it's interesting you mentioned that. I have to admit that most of the monsters, we're going to jump into a top 10 list later on, but
Yep.
most of the monsters that I picked for my top 10 list, they had very long
Mhm.
entries, in general. So,
Ooh, all right. Now I'm
yeah.
intrigued to see
Yeah.
which ones you picked.
Little tease there.
Yeah, and I guess I should mention too that in Dragon Magazine 55, there was a little bit of a debate, because after the book came out,
Yeah.
one or two individuals gave their kind of reviews, and they gave a fairly frank assessment, critical assessment in Dragon, about their impressions of the book. And one of those commentators was Ed Greenwood, and they really kind of savaged the book a little bit. And then uh, Kim Mohan, I think it was, kind of pushed the book's editor to respond. So then he kind of retorted in print. And yeah, you can find that in Dragon 55, and it's interesting. And I do agree with a lot of the criticisms, because like Ed Greenwood did raise the fact that some creatures aren't super detailed, and seem to be more of the stick and odd ability on a creature,
Yeah. Yeah.
variety, that kind of thing. Like, well, this skeleton's blue, and it does
Hmm.
this kind of thing. Surprise, surprise, or this toad belches fireballs, kind of thing. Because there's like a fire toad in there, and it's kind of like a giant toad, but it happens to belch fire, so yeah, I kind of agree with a lot of the criticisms, but the editor also kind of gets his points in too. So it's an interesting, for those who can dig it up online, or in an old copy of Dragon, it's a worthy read if you like the Fiend Folio. I found it interesting, back in the day when I read that.
Yeah, yeah, and for the for the kids out there, that's how you used to have to do it. There was no social media. A book was rumored or announced to come out in '79, and then just for some reason it showed up 2 years later, and there was like no backstory on it. There was no, oh, just one day it was in the store,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you were like, oh look, it's finally here.
yeah.
So I think that's kind of interesting in its own. But yeah, and think about that. No internet, no
Mhm.
social media. Yet at the same time, that book was so divisive, I guess I would say.
Mhm.
that, there was editorials and rebuttals that had to be
Mhm.
printed in a monthly magazine, probably months after the fact,
Yeah.
just because that quote unquote that argument was raging, if you will. So,
Yeah.
and I can almost make some arguments that the book's better than the original Monster Manual on some
Mhm.
levels. I'm not all levels, obviously,
Mhm.
but some levels I could almost make that argument. So,
Yeah.
and maybe we will make that argument a little bit once we get into into it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Um,
I
so
think any monster book is going to have its hits and have its misses, no matter how
yeah,
much you try to produce a monster book that's great across the board. Whenever you're dealing with DM preference alone, I think you're going to,
yeah.
the monsters I like may not be, what you enjoy. So it's hard.
And
DMs are very subjective creatures.
yep, and I think that's the whole reason why you give them hundreds of them, because you're
Hmm.
not going to, you're going to look at them all and you're like, oh, I'm never going to use that, but maybe I'm going to use this one. So, and yeah, I think we'll definitely get into that. So, yeah, so a couple things about the book that resonates with me is, first of all, we already touched on a little bit some of the classics that were in the book, and some of those were, again, some of those were included because they were already published in TSR modules, like the Drow,
Hmm.
like the Kotoa. But others really became classics, like the
Yeah.
Hook horror.
Yeah.
Really kind of became a classic. And the Grell, the Gith Yankee on the cover.
Mhm.
These are just now you think of them now back in current D&D terms, and you're like, wow, those are classic
Mhm.
monsters, and that's where they first appeared in the Fiend Folio. Although apparently they appeared possibly in White Dwarf magazine before that. So
Yeah.
so I think that's a fascinating tidbit of it. You already talked about the art. Yes, the art was actually, I thought the art was very good. In the
Mhm.
book, there was actually numerous full page artwork,
Yeah.
which was kind of it was definitely the first time they did that in a monster book.
Mhm.
And the way they used some of those was just evocative, I thought.
Mhm.
And there was a lot of several monsters had more than one piece of artwork for
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
So that was kind of interesting, I
Um,
thought. And then one last thing on the art is at the end there was, like you said, a lot of this art that didn't really fit. It was
mhm.
like just kind of like, here's art, and you mentioned that Conan piece. It's funny, I was going to mention that Conan piece too.
Oh, it's funny.
Conan Lake piece, I should say. But yeah, it's what it
Yeah.
looks like. It looks like it was a
Right?
paint
It's got
spread that
that.
was
Yeah.
for something else, and they were just like, oh, hey, it's too cool of a piece of artwork
Yeah.
not to put that in there, and so they did. And that was fascinating. So I love that. So
Yeah. I mean, again, I find the art uneven. I love the bigger pieces of art. I think as the book goes on, like once you get past page, 80 or so, then the art starts to me getting really good, and you
mhm.
start getting toward the back of the book.
Yes,
Um, some of the monsters that seem to come from modules, that appeared somewhere else first, in almost all those cases, I disliked the Fiend Folio art, and that I felt
yes,
like the original,
it took a step back.
yeah, like
Yeah,
the first picture I had ever seen of the Koatoa was the one in the Fiend Folio. I don't even
mhm.
know if I would have been as motivated to use them, and the
Yeah,
same goes for the Germlani and a few others. And
mhm.
yet, when I think back of the original, D series illustrations, they just seem much more serious and kind of caught me a little more. So I recall at the time I got the Fiend Folio, looking at those monsters and being thrilled that they were statted up and put into an official book. But I already knew them, so I was happy to see them.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, it was like, so there, there's some uneven cases, but there are absolutely some great illustrations in there. And I love the big pieces. It's just, I think it's better than the Monster Manual in that way. That art, from an art perspective, I think it's
I,
got some
I would
really cool.
I would agree. I think one other thing I think that really kind of sets it aside from the Monster Manual is the back of the book, all those awesome tables.
Hmm.
And that was something that wasn't included in
Yeah.
in the Monster Manual, and there was tables for different terrains and different
Hmm.
monster types and everything. And
Yeah.
actually, if I recall in that letter, that rebuttal letter, that was how you determined whether or not something was an undead. For
Yeah.
example, there wasn't types, and there wasn't, so it's like, hey, if it's not on the chart, it's not
Yeah.
undead. And I think I think the editor, Don, points that out a couple times, like, well,
Yeah.
clearly this one's not undead because it's not in table number whatever. So
Yeah.
I thought that was actually kind of I thought that was needed.
Mhm.
And I thought that was something that was actually missing from the monster manual.
Oh yeah.
And again, the monster manual, first monster book of its kind, for D&D. So it's like they didn't know what DMs needed and what DMs didn't need. So,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, we have
it's
to go a
something.
little easy on it, but
Yeah,
just think of how commonplace those sort of tables are now, those terrain
exactly.
tables.
Yeah,
And yeah, Fiend Folio, set it down. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
It's like you would almost
it's
not
strict.
consider a monster book these days without those type of tables.
No, I look for
Like that
them.
would be, yeah,
And I've always
exactly,
made use of them as a DM,
exactly. Yeah.
especially if I'm in those harder terrains, like I find
Hmm.
it sometimes difficult coming up with creatures if the characters are like in the temperate plains or in the temperate hills or somewhere, a little more civilized, but outdoors. And I found myself going to those tables and looking, at wandering monster tables or looking at the tables in these monster books to get inspiration for different encounters. So yeah, a worthy inclusion, there.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, definitely. And then the other thing that I actually really got a kick out of when I was looking through the book was the fact that they list the credits for everybody. And it makes sense since
mhm.
it was almost a community designed project, that it would make sense that they would list individual authors for the monsters. And I thought that was interesting and it was cool. When I developed my list, I actually jotted the authors down too. I think I only had two times where I had the same author. I wasn't sure if I was going to end up
Hmm.
with five creatures with the same author kind of thing. But so I thought that was kind of neat. I thought that
Mhm.
it was a nice little touch. I think the format that they used was pretty awful. It took like 4 pages to list everybody. I think they could have done that a little bit,
Yeah.
with not so much white space. But again, back then, they didn't have the modern layout tools that we have these days. And I'm sure a
Yeah.
book like that was just, it took a long time to get through all the different stages. So
They probably pasted it up on a whiteboard or something, or who knows what. They
exactly,
weren't
yeah.
cranking it out in Adobe InDesign or something. That's for sure.
Yeah, and and
So,
and and who could ever forget the famous Fiend Folio tagline on the cover of the
yes,
book? Yes,
yes.
a tome of creatures malevolent
11 and
and
benign.
benign,
Yeah,
and that just captures everything. I mean, that
awesome
is
tagline.
great. Yeah,
Awesome
yeah.
tagline.
So, and here it is, 30, 40 years later, and we're like, I still remember that line. I mean,
Yeah,
that's called good marketing. What
and
that is.
and even though I really, from a nostalgia point of view, I love the monster manual approach of giving you all these different monsters crawling around. I thought the cover was just in general really striking too. When you have that,
Yeah,
just the very, the colors are very in your face, and it's like, it absolutely grabbed your attention. So you weren't going to walk by on the shelf and like, miss the Gith Yankee screaming at you. So
yeah.
very cool.
Yeah, that is true. I think I prefer the other style better.
Mhm.
And I've seen other books have tried to capture that as well. But yeah, if you pull off that individual artwork, I think that's good. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, there's no question about it that the Fiend Folio of all of the D&D books produced back in the day, like that one just it stands
Yeah.
apart. I
Yeah.
mean, it's completely different. I mean, it
Yeah.
does, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think
No,
that's a bad thing at all.
no.
So cool.
I think some people, I think it'll always be viewed as a little bit of an outlier,
Yeah, yeah,
because it wasn't kind of like a Gygax production per se and these kind of things. But it's part of the official canon, and it's if people haven't looked at it, they should,
yeah.
because like you
Yeah.
said, there's so many creatures that are absolutely known now and have gone through many generations of monster manuals that started out in the Fiend Folio. Like you said, the Hakar is a perfect example. Uh,
Yeah.
of the or the Eder Carp and these different creatures that we know very well that
Yeah.
that was the first place they showed up. So there's quite a few hits in there. I found this
Definitely.
our little top 10 list. I found it was difficult.
It always is. It always is. Well,
Yeah.
speaking of, I think we should
Speaking
get to
of,
it. I think we should jump right in, man.
sure.
So, any caveats before we start?
There's always caveats, man. My caveats would be, aside from that, it was hard. Is that I could have made it almost all races, and I didn't want to do that. I do have some races in there, but I didn't want it to
Mhm.
be,
Yeah.
like 90% races. So I left out some obvious races, so they can get like a, caveat. That's part of my caveat. I'll give an honorable mention to the Dro and the Bully Rug. I left one race in there because I couldn't bear to take them out, but by and large, I tried to avoid that. And I tried to avoid things that were purely personal preference. There's no monster on my list that I don't like, but I also tried to pick. For me, my list is more like monsters worth considering by DMs to use, as
Yes.
opposed to just a monster Rick likes. Like, for
Mm-hmm.
example,
Mm-hmm.
I've used the Vault many times because I just find it like a bad tempered, annoyance creature kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that's not on my list, because
Okay.
as much as I like it, and as much as I've used it, I could think of other monsters that may lend themselves to more story possibilities or
Yeah.
different adventure twists. So that's my caveat.
Yeah. Yeah, mine is right off the bat, I didn't put some of the obvious choices in there. There's no Flump on my list. There's no Drow. There's no Kotoa. They're all good. But I went for, a little bit more obscure, some obscure. I do have some silly ones in there. But they're
Hmm.
more, like you said, compelling storytelling, monsters that you can use a couple of different ways
Hmm.
and that you're going to get a little bit more mileage out maybe. And as we
Hmm.
mentioned earlier, my list tends to be the monsters. I think I only have two monsters in there that had really short entries. Most
Okay.
of the entries were pretty long and detailed. And same thing, I
Yeah.
have a few, humanoids in there, and but just a couple. So
Hmm.
so all right, so let's get to it, man. Why don't you
Yeah.
kick us off, man? Get us started.
All right. My first pick, and I was torn on this one, is the apparition. Um, I thought that was an interesting undead. I like the suggestion of the fingers at the throat. I like the attack kind of from the ethereal plane. Just the psychological element kind of terror to it, I think is very cool. There's quite a few undead in the book that, again, to me just seem like skeletons with something thrown onto them. But the apparition was detailed a little more. The way its attack is detailed, I thought was kind of cool. Like if they put some thought into it, and I have used it effectively in encounters. So my number 10 would be the apparition because
Oh, okay.
to me it qualifies as a cool undead. So yeah.
Nice. Excellent. Cool. All right. So my number 10 is the Shadow Demon. And
Mm.
and yes, part of the inspiration on this is clearly the D&D cartoon. Who can forget, Avengers right hand little skulk and everything. But the Shadow Demon, a couple reasons why. First of all, aside from the cartoon, all about stealth, all about sneaking around, made a
Mhm.
perfect minion to a big bad. Obviously, we
Mhm.
saw that in the TV show. I love that part of it. Interesting game mechanics with it, and the fact that it was more powerful in the dark and was weaker during the light in the light. I thought
Mhm.
that was really
Mhm.
cool. And I kind of liked that, kind of, almost like creating new rules just for that monster. And even to the point where if you cast a first level light spell on it, the light spell acts like a fireball on it, which is just fascinating.
Mhm.
And again, I mean, when we played first edition, we always used to use light and cast it in people's eyes to blind
Mhm.
them. That was not in the rules, but we did it anyway. And the game master's like, yeah, sure, you can do that. And so I really kind of like that. I felt like that was
Mhm.
giving us kind of reason to do those type of things. And like,
Yeah.
look, they're doing
Yeah.
it too. So I always found the Shadow Demon to be
Mhm.
fascinating in that regard. So that's my number 10. Just
That's
correct.
a good pick. And that is so very first edition. The try this
Hmm.
spell and see what effect this has on this creature.
Yep.
And it's almost as if they took the shadows from the monster manual and then really started thinking about how they would interact with different attack forms
Yes.
and different things and just
Very much.
made them better. So
Yes. Yeah.
excellent pick.
Yep.
My number 9 is the Penangalan. Um,
Okay. I knew you were going there. I
did
knew
you know that?
I
Yeah,
did. I
very
did. I pegged that one. I got a couple I know you can
horrifically,
go
yeah, I
for.
bet. Horrifically bizarre undead, though it's kind of it's very, for people who don't know the myths, they look at this thing and say, oh my god, look at this thing. But very solidly grounded in Malaysian myth. I mean, I think just about every country in Southeast Asia has their form of the Penanggalan myth,
Hmm.
but they all name it something different.
Yep.
But yeah, just because it is, again, it looks whacked out, but it is very horrifying. It's got the vampiric thing. I could see a story element where these things are going out at night and preying on people again in that kind of vampire-like way. And the fact that I always like when things are grounded in myth. I tend to think that's cool. So there's a story element there. So yeah, for a lot of those reasons, I would give my number 9 vote to the Benanglan.
Wow, so 2 for 2 on undead.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I didn't even think about that. Well, I'll
yeah,
switch
no,
it up with
it's
the
okay.
next one, I promise.
All right. So my number nine's a little bit out there. This is going to be a little bit surprising, I think. My number 9 is the Iron Cobra.
Hmm.
So I know, you know, probably because yeah, man, I cannot remember the module that the Iron Cobra was in, but it was in a module, and I remember using it, and I remember it being a favorite go-to low-level monster that I would use. Part of the reason I liked it was, it was a construct, but it wasn't a golem, and it was probably that first creature that was like, hey, you can have animated things that aren't golems that are, have 16 hit dice kind of thing. So I love that part about it. I loved that, the description of the Iron Cobra was like, created by wizards guarding. Interesting thing, and the picture that Thorn threw up there a second ago actually shows it. You could command it to go hunt somebody
Hmm.
down. And I thought that
Yeah.
was fascinating. That was like, it's not just a guardian that just sits in this room. It can
Yeah.
be it could be an active moving thing. I thought that was kind
Hmm.
of neat. And there was this is one of the ones that the second piece of artwork showing that.
Hmm.
And I love that. And I love that they even said that the poison didn't have to necessarily be poison to kill you.
Right.
It could have been a different, you could be paralyze you or whatever. I love that. I love the
Yeah.
fact, the variability of it.
Hmm.
So yeah, so this was one of those ones that I've used a lot. And is it the greatest? No, it's not the greatest monster out there, but I like the versatility of it.
Hmm.
It suited low level games. That's why
Yeah.
that made my number 9.
Yeah. Absolute utility there. My number 8 is the Menlock.
Okay.
I like the description of the vertical layer. I think it's
Mm.
unusual,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because I tend to do in my dungeons, I've done these like vertical passages with spiders in the middle and webs in the middle, and I've done that kind of thing before in the past. So, like, yeah, anytime you get the adventurers in that navigating an unusual environment where they have to survive, or where they've been carried off to or imprisoned or any of that kind of stuff, I like. So, again, strictly for the detailing of the layer, I would go with the Menlock because I liked it. It came off as real to me, and I liked the way they kind of took the time and really explained how this thing lives and kind of preys on people and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, the number 8, the Menlock.
Nice. That's a solid choice. It was on my short list. Didn't make it, but it was on my short list. So my number 8. Before the show started, Rick and I were discussing. I don't think we're gonna have much carryover on these lists. I think we're gonna be pretty much different, but this
Uh-huh.
is one I think we might have some carryover on. I think we might
Okay.
cross over on this one here. My number 8 is the Germlane, or otherwise
Hmm.
known as the Jinxlings, Jinxkins, or Jinxkins, or Jinxlings, or so created by Gygax. These guys made their appearance in D1 Descent into the Depths. Basically, tiny little humanoids, like 1 to 4 hit points each, but they could swarm you with their numbers, and their little traps and nets and
Mhm.
little clubs. You can see the picture there. The one's got like a little club, and there was actually, even again, I liked it. There was these little special rules that, like, every time you were hit, there was a 2% chance you could get knocked unconscious.
Mhm.
Like, it didn't matter if you were 20th level, you can get knocked unconscious by this little dude, especially if you were like strapped down or grappled down or something. Um, and these guys again were a little bit more, they were combat focused, but in different ways. Like, they did not just
Mhm.
stand there and fight you like a goblin or a hobgoblin. They used tricks, they used traps, they used stealth, cunning. It
Mhm.
was more about encounter design with these guys, on what you could do, all the different things you could do with them. Typically had them mounted on giant rats. I actually even had like knights wearing armor, Germlane knights with armor. They still only had 1 to 4 hit points, but they're like little tin cans, and they
Mhm.
had, they're on their rat, and then they would die just as easily as the other ones would. But no, I've used them a couple times in my home campaigns, and I like them because you could tell some story with them. They
Mhm.
weren't that you could certainly just run an interesting combat with them, but you could also do some interesting story things with them, and you'll see that that's a theme that I kind of keep going back to with my monsters is story and variability, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my number 8, the Germlane. So we'll see if
Nice.
it pops up again.
Yeah, very nice. We shall see. Well, speaking of pop-ups, my number 7 is the Iron Cobra. Um,
Wow. Okay.
I
Time out.
know.
I didn't think there was any way that you were going to grab that one. Wow. That is
Surprise,
stunning.
surprise.
Wow.
Um, for pretty much all the reasons you mentioned, I think it's a interesting low level creature. I thought it was, I think of it as a guardian, but like you said, it's also got that, Sikkim option. And maybe I'm extrapolating or, I'm going from my memory of the description, but like you said about the poison, I always got the thought that you could have neutral wizards or evil wizards with different versions of these, or at least that's the way I've
Mm-hmm.
kind of played it, because
Oh
again,
yeah.
you're kind of thinking construct that's not. And on some level, I guess you could, like, I could toss the necrophilia Phidias in here too from this book, and kind of serve some similar functions, but I always liked the Iron Cobra more. And at the time it came out in the Fiend Folio, we didn't have as many,
No.
these
No.
minor guardian creatures or these
Yeah.
clockwork things, and a lot of the
Yeah.
stuff that came out later. You kind of had the golems, and the golems were really very tough opponents. You
Yep.
weren't going to just throw a stone golem or an iron golem at the average adventure walking into a, certainly not low level adventures. So for that reason, it really fit into that niche of some sort of, animated or guardian creature or, construct kind of role. So yeah, for the reasons you said, and just for sheer utility, number 7 goes to the Iron
Wow.
Cobra on my list.
That's great. All right. So now I'm going to be totally wrong, and we're going to cross over on 3 or 4 things because that
We'll see.
I looked at my list and I was like, oh, there's no. That I was like, no way. I debated not putting the Iron Cobra on my list
That's funny.
because of that, and I was like, I think that's too far out there. But I'm like, no, I
Oh
love that
no.
thing too
Oh,
damn
we
well.
haven't even
So
gone out there yet.
yeah, that's true. So, all right. So my number 7 is a little bit of a cheating here. This is a grouping of monsters.
Okay.
And this is one of those monsters that are now classic D&D monsters, and
I
you
know where
always
this is
use them.
going.
Do you? These are the
Yeah.
Mephits. The
Oh,
Mephits.
okay.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Mephits made their first appearance in the
Hmm.
Fiend Folio. There was only 4 of them. And their
Hmm.
artwork was a little wonky, and much too large that was needed. But
Hmm.
again, versatility, the variety was
Hmm.
there, and you could easily say, oh, well, I want an ice Mephit, or I want a wind
Hmm.
Mephit, or whatever. So it was one of those things where it was almost like a blank canvas. Like, we're going to give you a couple of them, kind of like the Giants, Fire Giants, Hill Giants, and whatever, and then you can just go take it and run, take the concept and run. And again, low level outsiders, you didn't have many low level outsiders that you could run into. Elementals were tough, demons, devils were
Hmm.
tough. So if you had your characters low level, you didn't have many of those options to go up against. But Mephits
Yeah.
gave you that opportunity. They just had a host of interesting abilities. They had breath weapons, they had innate
Hmm.
spells that they could cast. They had immunities to
Hmm.
whatever element that they were associated with. It was interesting too. I was reading through the descriptions. Only the smoke mephit had the death burst, and I think nowadays every mephit has some
Yeah.
sort of a death burst.
Yeah.
And it's cool. I mean, when
Hmm.
back at the original Cyclops Con, we were running an event and there was a mephit in it, and sure enough, they killed it. And there was like 3 characters surrounding it, and it blew up, and they were all within 5 feet of it, and they all took damage, and somebody died at the end of the encounter,
Hmm.
and it was a lot of fun. So and the last reason, they're pranksters.
Hmm.
So almost like the Germlane, you can do some things with them. They weren't really designed for straight combat, because even in straight combat, they didn't have many hit points, and they didn't have, outside of their special abilities, they didn't do a whole lot. But there was some role playing opportunities there, and I love that. And I had designed many, many of encounters that, give a method a magic wand and go have some
Hmm.
fun. So that was my number 7 methods.
Interesting. And I will say there were 3 creatures that just missed landing on my list, and Mephits is one of the 3.
Okay,
So
yeah, yeah,
for what it's worth, they're not on my list,
cool.
but they came very, very close. My number 6 pick is the Germlane.
Okay, wow, we've crossed over twice now.
Yeah. Um, I fell in love with them, when they were described. I guess it was in the back of Descent in the Depths of the Earth.
Yep.
And again, like you said, nice long kind of Gygaxian description. But I think that's why I fell in love with them, is because rather than just say, oh, these guys are really small and leave it at that, there's such description given to really frankly how sheerly evil and malicious these little guys are, where they're cutting straps and they're doing this. And I think there's a description where exceptionally old ones or evil ones can actually like drain magic or drain
Yes.
potions or magic items.
Yeah.
And if they can fuss with them for a certain amount of time. And yeah, I recall reading them and just thinking how, yes, they're not attacking to kill necessarily or that kind of thing, but just almost like the sheer evilness of these little guys, that they're going to waylay travelers or just inflict harm or spoil things just for the sheer meanness of spoiling them. I just thought they were like a really horrible thing to inflict on players, when they're traveling from one place en route to the other, say, down an underground passage, and maybe they're camping out for the night, and then they wake up in the morning, they find, that the germ lanies, have struck. So yeah, I think that really caught me. I got caught up in that description, that the sheer evilness of them. I kind of grew up on those horror movies, like that one with all the little creatures in the house. I can't remember what it was called. I want to say Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, but I might be confusing it with that movie with the blind woman, the burglar. So I don't know, but there was a movie where there was a house with these little creatures, little critters, in the ductwork and that kind of stuff. And they even remade it. And that had these little guys like that were creeping around. So I think when I saw the German, I thought of them. I thought, oh my God, that really reminds me of this movie that scared me as a kid. So yeah, they're my number 6.
Cool.
Awesome creature. I think they're
Yeah.
great.
Wow. All right. So keeping score at home, we've crossed
2 for
over
2.
on 2, and we're not even in the top 5 yet. This doesn't bode well. I've already lost my bet. So okay. So well, I'm pretty sure this one's not going to be on your list.
Okay.
So this is where my list goes briefly off the rails for a little bit because Chris has some
Mhm.
fun. My number 6 is, yep, the fire toad. You already mentioned it. So,
Mm.
and this is silly. The concept is silly. It's a
Mhm.
toad. It belches fireballs. But
Mhm.
think about that for a minute there. It belches fireballs. You don't need the roll to hit with that, and it can affect the entire party. And it's like a toad. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
big toad. It's like a 4-foot toad, but still. So sure enough, you're gonna walk up to this thing, you're gonna be like, it's just a toad, whatever. And then the next thing you know, the thing's raining fireballs on you. And it's like, and it could
Mhm.
like rain them, it can literally, and if you like damage it and it tries to escape, it can actually do 2 fireballs in the
Right.
same melee round. Yeah, which is crazy too.
Yeah, doesn't it
So
doesn't it react badly to water, or if you try
yes,
to hit it with
it's same
water,
thing. It's
it,
same thing.
it
If it,
does
yeah,
something?
it does the same thing. Yeah. So part of the reason why this guy got on the list was I did convert these for Temple of Elemental Evil.
Mhm.
I had the honor to work on the fire node a bit, and they were in there. They were actually listed in there
Mhm.
that they were in the node, so we put them in there. And I remember when in converting them, I was having a blast. And I said, well, this is kind of cool.
Mhm.
Actually, they actually translate very well to 5th edition
Mhm.
with it basically if you put water on it or if you get it to flee it as a reaction it drops 2
Mhm.
fireballs and it's like wow it's cool. So
Dangerous.
yeah, and clearly in my opinion inspired by the ice toads from
Yes.
in the monster manual, the original monster manual, and in G2. Everybody remembers the ice toads,
Mhm.
and they were,
Absolutely.
yeah, and I think people really like the ice toad encounter
Mhm.
and concept. They don't think they like the fire toad as much. So
Yeah.
but yeah, but that's my number 6. A little
Nice.
bit silly. I go off the rails a little bit there, but I'm sticking
No,
with it.
nothing wrong with, and
Belching
I've
fireballs.
for the record, like I've used ice toads a lot. And
Yeah.
I think it's a lot for the reason you described. I think the ice toad encounter in G2, where you've got them kind of sitting in this cave, sort of, I think, worshiping this little protrusion of rock,
Yeah.
uh, caught me up, and I just started using them. So yeah, my poor players have been hit with quite a few. I don't know if I've ever hit them with the fire toad, but we can always change it from ice to
Yeah, there you go.
from cold to hot. We got to keep the players guessing. Um, my number 5, this is probably going to seem like an easy pick or an easy way out, but it's a creature bunch that, like you said, another one of those bunches of creatures that kind of became, I think, classic. Though I don't think a lot of people use them. Is the slot? I think I like the fact that they started kind of thinking about the other planes and filling in some of those gaps, because
Mhm.
we kind of know the higher planes and we know the really lower planes, and then at that time, at least when the Fiend Folio came out, there was a whole lot of mystery as to what else was out there
Yeah.
in the middle. So the fact that this was an effort to start populating those kind of chaos, to put a more chaotic creatures in there, and then creatures from those other like planes of existence, I thought was cool. And they're exceptionally dangerous, very alien. um,
Hmm.
I've used them infrequently, more because, especially in later editions, they're frankly very powerful, so they're not the kind of creature you can just casually throw at players, and not
Yeah.
something they're just going to encounter on a country road. um, but when you do bring them out, I think, if you use them properly, you can kind of make a lasting effect. And I'm currently even planning something in my home campaign about, don't listen to my players if you're listening, about, an NPC that is actually going to be like a slot in disguise. So, yeah, that's my number 5. Perhaps an easy way out, but the slot.
Nice. I have to admit, I kind of figured those were going to make your list, and I
Interesting.
kind of shied away from them for that reason. I did. They were definitely on that cut of I need to consider these guys.
Mhm.
And then I kind of looked at it and I said, yeah, no, I'm like, that's got Rick written all over it. So I'm like,
That's funny.
I'm not going there. I'm not going there. And I've already blown it. If my players are listening, I've already blown it too, because fire toads are coming. So
Mhm.
okay. So my number 5, again, continuing my theme of slightly being off the tracks here. I promise we'll get back on the tracks after this pick. Is the Al Mirage, the Blink Bunnies.
Ah.
So now everybody knows that I kind of like cute and fuzzy things.
Mhm.
And I do. And these guys are definitely one of my favorite. I mean, for some reason, just a bunny rabbit with a unicorn
Mhm.
horn. It's crazy. It's whimsical. You read the inscription now. A couple interesting things I found out about this. First of all, nowhere in the Fiend Folio does it mention teleportation or blinking. Not at
Hmm.
all. That didn't come apparently till second edition. I researched it. That came in second edition. Also, what came in is apparently down in third edition or Pathfinder. The horn could actually turn you to stone, and that
Oh,
really
wow.
brings it up to that
Yikes.
turns it into like a cockatrice kind of a deal going on
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
So that brings the stakes up high, and they hint that they are psionic as well. So it's like, wow, don't mess with blink bunnies is what the take home message is there. But originally the first edition ones in the Fiend Folio, they really didn't do much except for stabby with the horn, and
Mhm.
that was about it. Probably inspired a little bit by the Vorpal Bunny from
Mhm.
Monty Python a little bit.
Yeah.
But interesting nonetheless, and interesting too. They were clearly forest dwellers, but in Fiend Folio even mentioned, oh, they could be encountered underground also, and it was like, what? It's
Just for
like it's
just for good measure,
just for good measure. It's like, oh yeah, by the way, since most people are in the dungeon, yeah, you can run into them too. So yeah, it's a little bit silly. I included them in into the Borderlands because I love them so much,
Mhm.
and I've done a couple of specific encounters with them. And again, it's a little off the rails, and a little bit more on the fun side for an encounter. Certainly not a combat driven encounter, more of a light-hearted kind of a thing when
Mhm.
you need to spring something like that on your players.
Mhm.
So my number 5, the Blink Bunnies, the Al Mirage.
That's a surprise. I should have guessed, knowing your love of small furry things.
Yeah.
I think when I look at them too, they make me think of the kind of, in American folklore, there's the whole bunch of like what I call the lumberjack monsters, the
Hmm.
all these different kind of, some silly with silly names, like, but there's all these different creatures, the fish with the fur, and sometimes you'll see these plaques with a fish with fur, and they'll say they
Yep.
caught this fish in an Arctic stream or whatever, and
Yep.
these things. And a lot of these creatures were made by these guys sticking horns on
Yep.
regular stuffed critters and that kind of thing. And I think when I see that, I think, oh my god, there's got to be an American folklore monster that is based on. I
It's
think when
actually it's Mid East. I think it's actually a
is
real
it?
thing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's based off of, or it's or Arabian. I forget what it is exactly, but it's there. There's like old tapestries
Huh.
with bunny rabbits. But yeah, no, they're based off of that.
Interesting.
That's why they got the crazy name. So yeah,
Interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
so they're created. Yeah, I don't think it's
huh.
a North American thing though. So
Yeah, because that's what I always thought was the kind of lumberjack tales when I would see them, and I think the carbuncle too. Like when I would see those two, I would think a
yes.
little bit of that. Interesting. All right, my number four is again. This is my last out there pick, and maybe a little bit. It would seem like an easy pick, but I'm not usually into the other planar stuff. Is the Githyanki Githrai
Hmm.
um, kind of combo, and again, more both for the fact that it fills in the planes, but also for the story element. I like the clash of the two races. I like they've kind of set these races, as dueling elements, and I think that's cool. I think it lends itself easily to story, DM stories
Hmm.
if you want to go there.
Hmm.
You could easily have the characters stumble into some sort of conflict between these two, very otherworldly races. So for that reason, yeah, just mainly for the story element and the possibilities, I would go with Githyanki Githrai.
Yeah, I can't certainly can't argue with that. I thought about them. I shied away from it because it was the cover of the book. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a sneaky suspicion you would go there too.
Ah, that's funny.
So, yeah, and I kind of yeah. So I was kind of like I just thought yeah. I was like that's yeah. So and I don't think I've ever used them. To be honest with you, so most of the monsters that are on my list are monsters I've used or designed around
Yeah.
or had very memorable encounters with. So yeah, so okay, interesting.
Lemnor is asking, what is this, a top 10 list of? Well,
It's
beyond maybe favorites of the Fiend Folio, I guess I think loosely, Chris and I were thinking
yeah,
creatures that our listeners, maybe, and our viewers should give a second chance or give a second look at, for
yeah.
your use.
It's top 10 of that we think are use that you should be considering
Yeah.
using basically.
Yeah.
That you might be missing or and Rick and I we thought about it. We could have gone top 10 weird. We could have gone
Yeah.
top 10 powerful. We could have gone top 10, but we just decided we wanted this to kind of be more utility. So we want
Hmm.
people to think about using them in different ways. So
Yeah.
that's where we're going with that. Anyways. So my number four still continues to be a little bit out there.
Mm.
Definitely. This was the Guardian Familiar. So,
Hmm.
and again, so this is an interesting critter. Looks basically just like a little house cat, and not
Hmm.
actually a familiar. But the special rules trick with this one was just like a cat. You actually had to kill it 9 times, and every time you
Mm.
killed it, it got more powerful.
Wow.
So it was like one hit die when you first killed it, then it was two hit die, and it got like its AC got better, its damage got better, and then right, to the point where and think about that. So it
Hmm.
starts with one hit die, and then it ends up with 9 hit dice and +9 damage, and its armor class is 9 better.
Hmm.
There's not too many parties that scale that well,
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
same encounter. That's pretty mind-boggling and innovative, really, and that's probably what attracted me to it.
Hmm.
And using it is because of the fact that it's kind of unexpected. Your characters wouldn't think about something like that, but then after a while they're like, oh wow, it's a cat, it's got 9 lives, we have to kill it 9 times, but then oh my gosh, it's getting more powerful as you go along. And and add some story to it, start making it look demonic, or it starts out as a house cat and it starts getting ends up as a bobcat and then a tiger and then some
Hmm.
infernal hellcat thing. So it's like you've got some interesting storytelling ideas there.
Hmm.
So I've always thought that that was pretty fascinating, and then of course as many times there was always a couple of spells that could like wreck it and ruin it and
Hmm.
basically end it all of its special things that it could do. So my number four, the Guardian Familiar.
Huh, interesting. Well, that is not on my list. That's
Didn't think it would
good.
be.
I know you and that furry thing. I don't know if number. All right, maybe my number three will surprise you. We'll see. I do like plant creatures. That's not a surprise to my players. My number three is the yellow musk creeper.
Yep.
Um,
Hmm.
I think they're very cool. I love the illustration.
Yes.
Um, at the time these guys came out, like later on, there were a lot of monsters that created what I would call like pseudo zombies.
Hmm.
Eventually we did get different, molds and different, ooze creatures that would sort of create their own little, what I would call zombified versions of their victims. But at the time the Yellow Musk Creeper came out, it was one of the first. And the idea of this kind of plant that would then, you know, infect people, for lack of a better word, and animate them and kind of make use of them. I found it very creepy. Uh, Something I did, in a not too distant Goodman Games adventure. I think I was thinking about the Yellow Musk Creeper in part when I got inspiration, for a creature that I featured in there. It made me think about that a little bit. I just find that process very horrifying of, them animating a body and sending it back. And I love playing creatures. And again, from a utility standpoint, you can kind of plunk them down in a lot of different places. So I've used them in ruins. Of you can put them in the wilderness. You could even theoretically stick it underground. Anywhere a plant could grow, possibly you could put this thing. So for those reasons, yeah, my number 3 is the Yellow Musk Creeper.
Yep. Just missed my list. Actually on my honorable mention list. I thought about it, just couldn't crack the top 10.
Mhm.
But definitely for all the reasons you mentioned, the utility, different things that you can do with it from a
Yeah.
storytelling standpoint. Yeah, love those guys. Those are really cool. There's been and they've been used very well in modules too,
Mhm.
to very good effect. So
Yeah.
excellent. So, my number 3, this is the one I thought we would definitely cross over on, and
Okay.
maybe we still will. Maybe we still
Yeah.
will.
We're getting
So,
short.
yep, no more fuzzy, no more fuzzy, no more warm. This is number 3. This is the Revenant. So, love
Mhm.
this guy. Ooze's story. I mean, again,
Mhm.
you mentioned a couple times how some of the undead
Yeah.
in this book were, not good at all, and just that one trick ponies or whatever. This guy had story.
Mhm.
And I, for those fans, everybody knows, well, not everybody, but if you don't realize, I'm a huge fan of the module I-12 Egg of the Phoenix, and they utilize the Revenant in that.
Mhm.
We're basically a cleric that, that you defeat, or gets defeated early on in the module, comes back later as a Revenant, and
Mhm.
actually helps you out, as an ally to help take down the big bad. Fascinating that you can do. Anytime you can bring somebody back plausibly, an NPC earlier in your
Mhm.
campaign, months earlier or whatever, that's a great thing. So they just ooze story, reoccurring possibilities. Just fascinated the fact how they hunt down their killers to wrong the deeds.
Mhm.
Not necessarily evil; they can't be turned.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they think you can be just honestly in the way,
Mhm.
and for some reason, whatever that reason is, you're standing between it and whatever it needs to right its wrong. And you just got some great role playing opportunities there, so
Mhm.
love them. And obviously I featured that in one of my 5th edition fantasy modules, the Eye of the
Mhm.
Leviathan. So love those guys. That's my number 3, the Revenant. So I'm surprised you haven't mentioned it already.
I wholeheartedly agree. I will tell you, it isn't on my list,
Wow,
but
wow.
as I mentioned earlier, I have 3 creatures that didn't make it, and we mentioned one of the 3. And just for the record, the Revenant and the Son of Chaos are the 2 that didn't make
Okay,
the cut.
gotcha.
And I'm looking at my notes right in front of me, and I actually have Revenant dash offer story possibilities is what I
Yep,
wrote next
yep,
to it, because
yep.
it screams. I mean, I can see a scene at the beginning of Adventure even where Revenant is, showing up, and the player characters have to understand what's going on, or what right, what wrong the Revenant is, coming back to address, or that kind of thing. Or maybe the player characters know a Revenant's coming, they're trying to prevent, this vengeance from taking place. There's so many ways you can go with that, from a story perspective.
Hmm.
um that one was on and off of my list. I can't tell you many. That was the one that's not on my list, but probably should have been, and was on an earlier version of my list. So
Gotcha.
yeah, can't agree more.
Yeah.
All right, my number 2, and I thought we might cross over on this one, but now we're so short on our lists. I don't.
Hmm.
I have
There's
my.
still time.
Now I don't think so. My number 2, and it might seem kind of mundane these days, but is the Kelpie.
Hmm.
I have gotten more mileage out of kelpies
Hmm.
over the years of playing. I just find, for aquatic creatures, they have great utility. Again, you can plunk them down. Um, when I did, my Mistcutter Isle adventure for Goodman Games, I either did I use a kelp? I thought I put a kelpie in there or something very similar to it because I tend to think of them. Um, yeah, I just find they have great utility for kind of when I need an aquatic. And I know you're all about aquatic opponents, but when I tend to need an aquatic opponent, kind of to plunk down in an isolated area, maybe something that's not quite as natural, where like a more like fish-like creature would be roaming around more, but something that is going to layer more and have a little more intelligence to it. I tend to go right for the kelpies like every time. So like, yeah, for sheer, again, utility, I've used them so many times, and gotten good encounters out of the kelpies. And there's so many myths too that strike that kelpie. There's so many of these water horse slash kelpie type myths that I love that basis too. That, like I said, I really kind of enjoy if there's a little real life mythology behind some of the monsters, because it just it adds the realism factor for me. So yeah, my number two, a little mundane perhaps, but the kelpie.
Wow. Did they make their appearance in C1? Was that a Kelpie in that? Was there a Kelpie in one of those encounters?
Yes,
It
yes.
was. Okay. Yeah.
Um, yeah, on the lower, or I believe it's a kelp, on the
Yeah.
first level or the lowest level of the pyramid, in C1, and that's I love C1.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, there is a kelpie in there. So
Okay. Yeah. I thought that's where they made their appearance. Yeah.
yeah.
Nope. I considered it.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, it did not crack the top 10. And
Ah,
there was no particular reason.
hmm.
But there was not a whole lot of aquatic creatures actually in the Fiend Folio. I mean,
Hmm.
there was a lot more other, undead and whatnot. So,
Yeah.
but that was a good, that's a solid choice. Solid choice.
Yeah,
I
you're
like
right.
it. So
There isn't a lot of aquatic
yeah,
creature.
not
They've got that
true.
aquatic umber hulk and the
Yeah.
bunny yip or whatever it's called.
Yeah, the
But I
bunyip, yeah.
can't think of too many off the top of my head.
Yeah,
So,
no, there isn't. There isn't.
um,
So, okay. All right, my number two. So this should surprise absolutely nobody. The Bullywug. I mean, I love Bullywugs. Be a huge fan of it. And as I was putting my list together, I did notice that there was a little bit of a D&D cartoon theme kind of popping up in my list, and inspired me. Um, Interesting to note that the Bullywug was created not just by Gary Gygax, but also by Luke Gygax. And I don't
hmm.
think Gary often gave his kids credit, probably because they didn't actually design things. But I thought it was an interesting move that he actually credited Luke, as for part of the design on this. So I always thought that was kind of cool.
Mhm,
Obviously, these guys popped up in I1, Dwellers of the
mhm,
Forbidden City, one of the best modules written out there, in my opinion. And again, I love them for all the reasons that we've already discussed. Variety, they do a lot of different things.
mhm,
You can have shamans. You can have they hinted at larger ones. There was the advanced ones, the primitive ones. The advanced ones used
mhm,
armor and weapons. The primitive ones didn't.
mhm,
In first edition and in OSR versions, there was the undead bullywugs, which I've used in my modules as well.
mhm,
I have a very healthy love for bullywugs.
mhm.
They pop up in a lot of my modules.
Mhm.
I'm not a, goblins, meh,
Yeah,
hobgoblins, orcs, meh, but oh yeah,
yep,
give me bullywugs and
yep,
lizard men. Yeah,
yep.
I'm all about that. So, and they make good minions to a big bad, be it the big bad being a
Mhm.
dragon or a wizard or something. There's definitely some versatility there. So that's my number two, the bullywug. So,
Very solid pick. The only reason they're not on my list is I gave them the honorable mention wave with the drow, but
yep. Yeah, I
uh,
thought about it.
yeah, I use bullywugs just as much as kelpies or more. And
Yeah.
again, the module I just mentioned that I wrote for Goodman, the Mistcutter Isle module, I have bullywugs in that as
Yep.
well. Um, because again, what utility, to me, anytime, and especially the fact that they, unlike lizard men, they lean more solidly toward evil. So
Yes.
anytime I have one of these boggy environments or something, and I want to put in creatures that are not devastatingly strong, but are, more solidly evil than lizard men, perhaps, I always go with bullywugs. And again, for the reasons you say, like there's flexibility there. They easily could be minions or associated with stronger creatures. And I've seen a lot of good treatments of them where in different modules from different companies where they've made like some kind of bullywug, king or a bloated version of one of them that's extra strong. And they've kind of, they're easy to take them, extrapolate a better version of them or a stronger, if you want to like tweak them out a little bit and make a leader or make some bullywug warriors or do that kind of thing. uh I just think there's a lot of play there, so I agree 100%. Great choice.
Cool.
Yeah,
All right.
definitely
Can't,
dig that. Are we down
can't
to
wait.
number one? Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
think
can't
we
wait to hear
are.
your number one.
All right, well,
And we've
this
only
is,
crossed over twice. Wow.
yeah,
So Iron
well,
Cobra.
this
Iron Cobra.
one, if it isn't on your list, I know it'll be on your honorable mention list. You might have taken it off because it's such a no brainer to you. But my number one is the Koatoa. I think they're an exceptionally well realized race. I think the long description that was provided in D2, I mean, forget, and we've discussed this in past shows, but beyond the whole D2, shrine and this big visage of this shrine and all these guys, they're just so well detailed in D2, and that was carried over into the Fiend Folio, where if you look, they have one of the longest entries, I think, in the whole
Oh
Fiend
yeah. Yeah.
Folio.
Yeah.
It's like, 2 pages of Koatoa. But that's why I love them is the creatures I like are the ones that really come off as real, and this was something where Gygax put in the work. He didn't just say, let's make fishmen, because it's easy to take that, I think, Flash Gordon approach where you say, oh, let's make fishmen and frogmen and crabmen and this men and
Mm-hmm.
that men, and they don't really come off as interesting. But the Koatoa are really, they lay out their sort of religion and their monitors and the different things, and then when you start going into the abilities and the attacks they can use and the weaponry, and they really
Mm-hmm.
come off as so alien, and they can be tough opponents if they're properly run.
Yeah.
So I love them. So yeah, I couldn't bear to leave them off my list, or I would have
Wow.
made them another another Dro like honorable mention. But my number one is the Koatoa. I
Yeah.
could
I
not put
mean,
them.
yeah,
Uh,
sticky shields. That's all you need to say. And
right.
hand catchers.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if I kept them on my list, they would have been number one also. So, but I didn't want to do that again. I wanted to be a little different. So,
Yeah.
I excluded them. I didn't count them. They're strongly on the honorable mentions. So for my number one, so this will probably be a surprise then.
Yeah. I want to hear
Um,
this now.
yeah. So again, pulling from inspiration from the D&D cartoon.
Uh-huh.
The Skeleton Warrior.
Oh my
I
God.
always been fascinated, and
Mhm.
again, when I first started putting my list together, and there's Decion himself from the cartoon. Yeah, you know, when I first started putting my list together, the Death Knight was on the list, and
Mhm.
and I was like the Death Knight and the Skeleton Warrior, and I'm like Skeleton Warrior I knew was going to be on the list, but the Death Knight I was
Mhm.
almost putting on because, well, Lord Soft, enough said. But then I was like, no, he's too obvious. And I'm like,
Mhm.
so I actually took him off. I just thought he was too similar to the Skeleton Warrior, but I've always been fascinated with the
Mhm.
Skeleton Warrior. An undead fighter, 10th to 15th level,
Yeah. Yeah.
basically a warrior lich, if you
Yeah.
will.
Yeah.
And
Can't be
crazy,
turned.
and it can't be turned, and then soul bound to the circlet, which he
Mhm.
usually doesn't have in his possession,
Yeah.
obviously. And usually the big bad has it, and he's making him do all sorts of evil things. So he could be evil, but he
Mhm.
could also be just being forced because he doesn't have his circlet. And I love that. I love that concept. I
Mhm.
love that, towing between two different things and everything, an undead creature that's maybe not just evil or whatnot. Heavily inspired. If you've taken the time to read all 700 and whatever pages of Castle White Rock, you'll know that there is a skeleton warrior in there. And it figures prominently, a prominent NPC, a skeleton warrior, and so love these guys to death. And again, the versatility, the storytelling, just exudes all of those things, and what I was always looking for, because you could have it run into a lower level party, and if it's
Mhm.
not going to just get into a fight with them, it's probably fine. But and
Mhm.
and and I've done that before. I've used Death Knights, with first level characters, and
Mhm.
obviously they can't touch them. It's kind of like Darth Vader walking into the room, and
Mhm.
you're not going to do anything about him. He's going to have his way. So So always been fascinated with skeleton warriors. Always felt like they
Mhm.
kind of got the second shaft. I always felt that the Death Knight and Lord Soth, and probably
Mm.
because he was featured in novels, full length novels, always got
Yeah.
the front bearing, and the skeleton warriors never did. So that's my number one there. So it's funny, I didn't think that was going to be my number one going into
Yeah.
it, but as I was putting my list together, I was like, I convinced myself, and I said, no, I think it's worthy. I think it's
Well,
worthy. So
I'm now going to upgrade us from 2.5 matches. I'm going to give you another half a match for that.
ah,
Because the number 10 on my list, the apparition, was originally the skeleton warrior, and I
wow, okay,
switched it at the last minute.
gotcha.
Um, but yeah, I love skeleton warriors too, because I always felt like, kind of like, to me, it's the counterpoint of the lich. I always felt like,
Yep,
why should wizards have all the fun? So
exactly.
the idea that, if you're an exceptionally powerful warrior, and like you said, what is it, 10 to 15th level they're supposed to be. So they're clearly, very powerful warriors. The idea that they could live on and, in death through some means, and that kind of thing. I just for that reason alone, just it seemed like a logical counterpoint to a lich. Like, why should, the liches be the only ones that would endure in that fashion, when you could have an exceptionally evil warrior that, to me, should, continue on in some fashion. So
Agreed.
yeah, they were on my, yeah. So I did like
Nice,
a little flip flop back and forth between the skeleton
nice,
warrior and the apparition. So
nice.
they were on there.
Cool.
So good pick.
Yeah, yeah, sweet. So, oh, excellent. Well, always fun doing a top 10 list.
Yeah.
We are at
Are
the
we
end of
over
our
time?
time. Not
Oh
by
yeah.
much,
Oh,
but
all right.
only by
Hey,
a
we're
little
pretty
bit.
good today. Yeah,
Yeah,
we're
no, we're
we're
pretty good.
close.
So
Um,
tell us what's coming up. Tell us what's coming
yeah,
up,
so
Rick.
what is coming up? I'm already looking forward to our next show, gang, and I hope you enjoyed this one. And again, for the record, if you enjoyed our show, please, continue to leave comments. We do read your comments, or if you're watching us later on YouTube, you can leave a comment there. Give us a follow, give us a like on YouTube. Feel free to subscribe. It all helps us. And we like to hear from you. But yeah, our next show, which I'm already getting psyched for, takes place on Sunday, November 29th. And this will also be at our 8 p.m. time slot. So please take note of our new time slot at 8 p.m. a little earlier. And we're going to start bearing down on the Temple of Elemental Evil, both looking at the original product and also talking about, our development of the original Adventures reincarnated version of the Temple of Elemental Evil. And in this next show, we're really going to focus on the village of Hamlet. We're going to start there and kind of look at that portion of the temple, and we'll get to other stuff of the temple in future shows as well. But our next show will center heavily on the village of Hamlet, both the
Cool.
original work and what we've done to upgrade it for fifth edition.
Sounds
So
good.
I hope everyone will join us for that, because I'm looking forward to that a lot.
Yeah, yeah. No, we got a couple of shows. I think we're going to talk about that. So, no, it sounds good.
Yeah,
All right, I think we will get ready to say our goodbyes, but before we do that, we will give our pearls of wisdom, our parting
that's right.
pearls of wisdom. I'll see if I can't take Rick's from him like I usually do.
You always do.
If you keep letting me go first, that's what's gonna
I
happen.
know.
So,
Go ahead, let's see.
my pearl of wisdom is, again, when I'm looking at monsters that really resonate with me, it's those ones that have the versatility, the
Mhm.
ones that have, okay, well, yes, and a lot of them are, the humanoid based ones that maybe you can have all these different versions and this and that and everything. But I'm always looking at something where it could be used in a comedy type encounter. It could be used as a straight tactical fight. It could be used as like a role playing interaction or a puzzly kind of thing. I'm always looking. Those are the monsters I always come back to, and always end up going to. And I think that in the Fiend Folio, you had a lot of those options. You had a lot of those where they even made up their own little subsets of rules to kind of handle how
Yeah.
they did things like the Guardian Familiar and even the Germlane. So that would be my pearl, is going to be, looking for monsters that are versatile and have lots of different ways that they could be utilized at the game table.
Hmm. Yeah. The multi-dimensionality. You gotta,
Yes,
utility is key. The more utility you build into your monsters, the more DMs are going to use them, or the more you're going to use them. So
definitely.
can't be said enough. My pearl of wisdom kind of extrapolates from that a little bit, but is just to think of any monsters. And I'm thinking of, people creating their own monsters. Um, think in terms of realism. Now, I say that realism with quotes around it, because we're playing a game about giant flying lizards that breathe fire. But try to think of monsters as living creatures that have a day job, that have something to do before the adventurers get there and after adventurers leave, and have aims and wants and desires. And even if they're mindless plants or something, think in terms of the real world. Think in terms of what the great white shark acts like, and what other what a cobra acts like, and what different maybe animals or creatures, as opposed to like a wolverine, say, or other, or a type of monkey or something. And when you think of the real world, we think of all these animals as neutral, and it'd be very easy to make them boring. But animals have great variety in the real world, in their behaviors and their mating rituals, and in the way they camouflage themselves and act. And if you make the creature real to you as a DM, it will only help it make it be real to your players. So that would be my pearl of wisdom, is trying to give it that extra level of detail, because as Chris and I said, a lot of the creatures we kind of focused in on with our top 10 list even tended to be the creatures with the longer descriptions, because we were given a little more meat to chew on when we're looking at those creatures. And for me, at least, that extra detail gave a little verisimilitude to those creatures. It made them feel like, yes, these germline are actually running around somewhere underground, and we better be careful because they exist. So that would be my pearl of wisdom. Give them that
Great.
realism.
Great. Excellent. Well, thank you everybody. Thanks for sending us chats. We appreciate that. Thanks for
Yeah.
watching. And we will be back in 3 weeks. Before you know it, we'll be here. So, all right,
See you right after Thanksgiving.
yep, everybody be well. Yep, the Sunday after Thanksgiving. Everybody take
Yeah.
care.
Good night.
Night.